The United States announced Thursday it is imposing levies on steel and aluminium imports on some of its major allies and major trading partners. What's the impact and the global reaction? The European Union, Canada and Mexico are now faced with 25% import tariffs on steel and 10% on aluminium beginning Friday in the United States. The longtime U.S. allies have reacted strongly and retaliatory measures are already being planned. Meanwhile, there is growing concern about the overall impact on all of this and what it will have on the global economy and international trade. We begin with CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. And Nathan, these measures have been in the pipeline for some time. Why is the U.S. going ahead with it now?
Yeah, good question. In fact, China was already tariffed on steel and aluminum imports, as was the major ally of the US, Japan. Some got exemptions, but the EU was given more time because the US wanted concessions, especially potentially on cars. Well, and Canada and Mexico were exempted because, of course, they're in the middle of renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, when progress on that stalled and when the EU basically said, no way when it comes to giving concessions because it's a unilateral move, the US felt it was time to actually impose these tariffs. And for the US, they see their aluminum and steel industries essentially decimated by cheap imports, they say, and using a bizarre 1960s Cold War era law, which is about national security, to protect these industries now. For Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, this is a global problem that requires a global solution. Let's take a listen.
Well, there's overproduction of steel and there's overcapacity throughout the world. And so we have needed to deal with it in a very global manner. You can't just deal with it dealing with one country.
And this is going to be a big deal because Canada alone, for example, has about 40% of the exports of steel to the US market. So it's going to hit a lot of people quite hard.
Right, Nathan, and what's been the reaction from Europe, from Canada, as you just pointed out, and Mexico?
Well, I mean, predictable, because everyone warned that if this happened, they would retaliate. They don't like the fact it's a unilateral move and now have moved forward formally to bringing it to the World Trade Organization. Canada and Mexico are very interesting because they're in the midst of this renegotiation, as I said, of NAFTA. And this, if it's a bargaining tactic, has had the opposite effect. I mean, you can't get as a closer ally or neighbor than Canada. Let's listen to Prime Minister Trudeau.
The American administration has made a decision today that we deplore and obviously is going to lead to retaliatory measures, as it must, but we regret that. We would much rather move together in partnership, understanding that no two countries have economies as interwoven and mutually beneficial as Canada and the United States.
And that is true. They are richly joined at the hip when it comes to trade. By the way, among that list of things they're going to tariff in retaliation for this includes maple syrup and beer kegs.
Right, Nathan. Meanwhile, Secretary Wilbur Ross is still planning to visit China for talks in the coming days. What's the latest on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this, but if I was a Chinese negotiator, I think my position just got a bit better, considering the Europeans now and the Canadians and the Mexicans would no way potentially join any sort of global pressure on China. Wilbur Ross, of course, meant last week it looked like he was going there to flesh out a potential deal whereby China would buy more US products, from agriculture to energy, as China's economy grows. Although there may not have been a figure on that, they were ready to sign deals. In fact, there's 50 negotiators there right now ahead of his trip. But as you know, earlier this week, the Trump administration decided to move forward with tariffs and potential investment restrictions on China when it comes to high-tech and export controls, really upending what the US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said was that the fact the trade war is on hold. Well, now it's not on hold. So the big question now is how difficult is it going to be to make a deal? And I think today's announcement is going to make things a lot more complicated, don't you?
Okay, Nathan, thanks a lot. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting for us. He's our White House correspondent.